Hello friends, and welcome to episode 4 of the Bonfire. Today's episode will be covering Deacons of the Deep and the Crystal Sages. Before doing research for this episode, I really knew nothing about these two bosses, and I was quite surprised to find that they both have pretty interesting lore. I ended up enjoying the process of making this video a lot more than I thought I would, so I hope that you enjoy watching it. So without further ado, let's first get into the story of the Deacons of the Deep. The Deacons owed their creation and initial success to three men who rose to the rank of Archdeacon, their names being Archdeacon Royce, MacDonald, and Klimt. These three men oversaw operations within the Cathedral of the Deep, at a time when I believe it was still considered to be a part of the Way of the White. Additionally, I believe at least two of these men to have been instrumental in the eventual corruption of the cathedral. This corruption ultimately came at the hands of Aldrich, who was later known as Aldrich the Devourer. And as for how he came to be a member of the Deacons of the Deep, we know that he at some point left Irithyll of the Boreal Valley to join the Way of the White, and he eventually rose to the rank of cleric. Pontiff Sullivan, who had at this point taken control of the church, eventually became aware of Aldrich's nasty habit of devouring men. And as Hawkwood the Deserter tells us, quote, "Let's take Aldrich for one, a right and proper cleric, only he developed a habit of devouring men. He ate so many that he bloated like a drowned pig, then softened into sludge, so they stuck him in the Cathedral of the Deep, and they made him a Lord of Cinder, not for virtue, but for might," unquote. Sullivan became concerned that word of his man-eating cleric would spread, casting a fog of doubt over his new regime. So, Sullivan banished Aldrich to the Deacons of the Deep, to be tucked away out of sight. Only Sullivan did not account for the impact that Aldrich would have on this sect of the church. The Deacons of the Deep were, at this point, a portion of the church that had been established with the express goal of staving off the deep. And the deep is, as I understand it, an entity that's akin to the abyss or the dark, as previously discussed in my Piss Watchers episode. So at this point, Aldrich is in the Cathedral of the Deep, and his time is growing near to link the flame. Believing that their actions are virtuous, the deacons help Aldrich gain strength by bringing him new men to consume. And following his first linking of the flame, the deacons come to revere Aldrich as a god, which eventually means that as Aldrich begins to lose faith in the first flame, so too do the deacons. Under Aldrich's command, they turn to the deep as their new god, ushering it in, with Archdeacon MacDonald even using it to create new sorceries, an act of heresy. And when the time came for Aldrich to once again link the flame, we know that he refused, instead opting to return to Irithyll with the goal of consuming Darksun Gwendolen, potentially with the hope of ushering in an Age of Deep, of which he would be the king. He is accompanied on this journey by Archdeacon MacDonald, who of the three founders seems to be the most devoted to him. Archdeacon Royce, on the other hand, chooses to stay behind in the cathedral, guarding Aldrich's tomb in the hopes that he will eventually return. But as Royce and the other deacons wait for Aldrich to return, the deep begins to take hold. I believe that the deacons were able to hold out for so long because of their faith in Aldrich, and before him, their faith in the old gods. But as soon as this faith began to waver, so too did their invulnerability. The description for the deep ring reads, quote, "A ring bestowed upon the deacons of the Cathedral of the Deep. In the cathedral slumber things most terrible, and as such, the deacons require a grand narrative, to ensure that they do not falter in their duty, a philosophy, to ward away the madness beckoned by the grotesqueries at hand," unquote. The deacons relied on their faith to keep them both safe and sane, but once this faith had gone, they had nothing to protect them from the horrors of the deep. By the time that we encounter them, they've completely succumbed to the deep, losing all individuality, even sharing a single soul. We kill the deacons that stayed behind in the cathedral, including Archdeacon Royce. And the description found for the Archdeacon holy garb found on Royce's corpse reads, quote, "Holy garb worn by Archdeacon of the Cathedral of the Deep, a sign of the Way of White's highest rank. Of the three Archdeacons of the Deep, one stood over Aldrich's casket, with hope that he would one day return," unquote. And as for what happened to Archdeacon MacDonald, he succeeded in helping Aldrich and went on to create the Aldrich Faithful Covenant before his eventual death in Irithyll. It can be inferred that the other deacons traveling with Aldrich died as well, although the details of their deaths are unknown. And what about the third founder, Archdeacon Klimt? Well, I don't believe that he features much in this story at all, as we know that his true loyalties lied with Rosaria. He himself was responsible for the creation of the Rosaria's Fingers Covenant. And the description of Rosaria's Fingers reads, quote, "Sacred seal of Archdeacon Klimt, who served Rosaria, Mother of Rebirth," unquote. I believe that Klimt left the church at some point after Aldrich arrived, either possibly foreseeing the eventual downfall of the church or just using Aldrich as a convenient excuse to leave. Klimt is never seen in his original form again, but I think it's possible that he became one of the worm-like creatures that we see around Rosaria, forever worshipping his goddess. And that pretty much sums up the Deacons of the Deep. For as shitty as their fight is, I do think that their lore is pretty interesting, and I did have fun trying to figure out how the Cathedral of the Deep, specifically the Deacons, fit in with the wider church. And I am, at this point, completely convinced that the Cathedral of the Deep was at one point a part of the Way of White. I really wish that there was more information about the three archdeacons specifically, because I would love to get into their individual backstories, especially Klimt's. I just found it so interesting that he rose to the rank of archdeacon within the Cathedral of the Deep while being entirely devoted to Rosaria seemingly the entire time. So if anyone has theories about any of the three archdeacons specifically, I would love to hear them. And now moving on to the Crystal Sages. They were initially students at the Vinheim Dragon School, where they learned of and became interested in the forbidden crystal sorceries of Seath the Scaleless. The sages became consumed with the desire to learn about these sorceries, eventually leaving their home in Vinheim to do so. And while it's unknown how many sages actually left the school in this pursuit of knowledge, we take interest in two specifically. A pair of sages that begin to draw inspiration from Big Hat Logan, a sorcerer encountered in Dark Souls 1. They wore a very similar wide-brimmed hat, and as we know, Big Hat Logan was also a follower of Seath, which could be the reason that this pair was so drawn to him. The description for the sage's hat reads, quote, "Enormous hat that completely obscures the face, belonged to twin gurus known as the Crystal Sages. The pair are said to be successors to the great sage Logan, and this big hat is a symbol of their pedigree," unquote. The two sages traveled together, spreading their knowledge of Seath's crystal sorceries and gaining disciples as they went. Eventually arriving at Lothric Castle, the sages became tutors to the Lothric family, also teaching the scholars within the Grand Archives. And at this point in their story, it's really unclear how many disciples they actually had, and how vast their knowledge of Seath's sorceries had actually become. But much like Seath and Big Hat Logan, the Crystal Sages began to be consumed by their own sorceries, losing their humanity along the way. And I believe that this descent into madness is one of the reasons that Prince Lothric refuses to link the flame, as we know that the sages played a prominent role in the prince's life. Perhaps they urged the prince to focus more on his studies than the world around him, just as they themselves were becoming consumed by their own studies of the crystal sorceries. But at some point, the sages part ways, with one being found in the Crucifixion Woods and the other being found in the Grand Archives, blocking the path to Lothric. I believe it possible that for whatever reason, one of the sages began to ally himself more with Farron's undead legion, leading him to be found closer to the Abyss Watchers, while the other remained wholly faithful to the Lothrics. It is believed that one of the sages began working with Farron's undead legion, teaching these crystal sorceries to the mages within the ranks. And this could explain why we find one of the sages here, in close proximity to the Abyss Watchers. Perhaps as a line of defense against those who would do harm to them, or as a line of defense against the Abyss itself. I think that the reason for the Crystal Sages' separation could be as simple as a difference of opinion, with one believing that their rightful place was with the Lothrics, and the other believing that it was in the fight against the Abyss. Regardless, both sages are eventually lost to madness, just as their predecessors had been, being consumed by the very thing that they had dedicated their lives to mastering. And that wraps up my coverage of the Crystal Sages. Definitely shorter than some of the other bosses that I've covered. But to be honest, I really just don't give a shit about the Crystal Sages. Like, they're cool, I guess. Some of the lore is kind of cool, I guess. The fight sucks. I don't care about them. I put out a poll regarding this, but I think that no matter what the consensus is, I'm going to do it anyway. I really want to take a break from Dark Souls and shift focus to Witcher. These videos just take so much time and effort to piece together all of these stories and write a script. And I really just want to take a break and cover something more straightforward that's just kind of like fun to talk about. So I think that for the next couple videos, I want to just talk about the Witcher bestiary. Still trying to figure out how I want to categorize the videos, but I really just want it to be fun. So that's my plan moving forward, at least until October when I finish my last semester of school, because then I'll have more time and energy to get back into these longer, more difficult videos. But that's all I have for this episode. If you got to the end, thank you so much. I can't believe that some of you actually care to sit and listen to what I have to say about this shit. I hope that you all have a great night, and as always, thank you for watching, and don't go hollow.